right, you're now good to begin.
Good morning, Title I coordinators. I'm Tara Rodriguez, Director of the Division of School and Program Improvement at the Kentucky Department of Education. Thank you so much for joining the call this morning. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe and healthy. I'm joined by two other presenters this morning, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
I am David Malonte, the Assistant Director in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
Hi, I'm Brenda Considine. I am the new Title I Branch Manager.
So let's go ahead and start with the logistics of the call. Let me share my screen with you so you can see our slides for this morning. If you have a question during the call about any information, please send me an email at the address shown on the screen. And we'll try to answer your question during the call, but if we can't get to it during the call, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterward. You should have received a copy of the slides we're using this morning, and the webinar recording and the slides will be posted on the Title I Documents and Resources webpage, usually within a day or so. So let's look at our what we talked about last month. On last month's webinar, we discussed a little bit some of the responses to the survey, just in a general way. We discussed monitoring of the school-wide plan and its implementation, and there were some updates and reminders. On today's call, Brenda will start by providing some updates and reminders about GMAP. David has some FAQs to share with you about equitable services, and then I'll talk about time and effort reporting, and I have a quick reminder about inventory. So without further ado, Brenda, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tara. First, I'd like to say I'm glad to join the team here at KDE, and I'm getting ready to start the application process. So I wanted to share with you this morning some of the things that we need to focus on in the pre-planning phase before we actually begin the application process in GMAP. If you could take some time and review your current plan and see how your funds were allocated for the 1920 school year and determine if those funds were meeting targeted areas in your needs assessment and CDIP, that would be very helpful before you begin your new phase. Make sure you consult with your stakeholders in the development of your FY21 Title I plan. This is a requirement. And so when you begin to consult with those stakeholders, you want to look at your building level and district administrators, incorporating other federal programs like Title II, Title III, Title IV, Title V, IDEA B. You also want to consult with SBDM councils, parents and community members, and those groups of stakeholders will provide feedback that's necessary for you to develop your new plan. Tara, can we go to the next slide? So when we get to that actual planning phase where you are going to be doing that consultation, you may need to look at including surveys, conference calls, or online meetings to get all of your stakeholders present and feedback. And during this consultation, make sure you focus on the purpose of the grant, which is to improve academic achievement of the disadvantaged. Ask for feedback on how to meet challenging state and academic content and achievement standards so that all of our students are successful. These conversations will be included in GMAP in the district requirements section. It will be very helpful in completing that. And always remember that consultation is ongoing. So to look at the parts of Title I, Part A, sections in GMAP, I just kind of briefly thought we could look at those so that you know that there are no new changes. All of the required sections are the same as last year. So you have your district requirements, district set aside, personnel details at the district-wide level, school program description, school eligibility, PPA list, school personnel and program description, services to private schools, budget and your budget overview with your plus and minus, consolidated state performance report details, and related documents. Thought we would look at the related documents section page in GMAP. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion regarding that section. So your Equitable Services packet upload does not belong on this page. It should be uploaded in the district document library. The related documents page can be used to upload supplementary documents as needed. If there's something that you feel you need to add to your application, that is a good place to put it. If the district received a school-wide program waiver for one or more of its schools, that approval documentation should be uploaded in the related documents area. So David, I'm going to turn it over to you for Equitable Services consultation.
Thanks, Brenda. We just had a couple slides to share around Equitable Services due to some recurring questions that we've been getting. So the first one is, how do I complete consultation during shutdowns? And we are going to recommend using electronic means, whether that's phone and video conferencing. You know, you might be able to have Zoom meetings or other types of video conference meetings with private school representatives. Please know that the consultation packet is a fillable PDF, so you can share that whether through whether it's through SharePoint or another format, or you can send that as an attachment, and it will accept electronic signatures. So we will accept electronic signatures on those forms, so don't hesitate to do that. Please note that you are going to need some private school student data to complete the 2021 application. We'll be opening that up hopefully in a couple weeks or so. We're just kind of finalizing allocations at this point. We will provide details on how to upload that form later on, but just know that for now, at least, you should be starting your planning and having conversations with your non-private schools, collecting data to get that application started. You can go to the next slide, Tara. So another question we have been getting is, what if I can't complete services designated for the 1920 school year? That may result from, you know, issues with communication, the types of services that were planned, because you're probably not doing face-to-face services. So you have several options. In this case, I think it's important to note that the requirements for providing equitable services still exist, along with all the other Title I requirements. So a few of the recommendations we would make is to, in lieu of one-on-one face-to-face services for students, you may consider computer-based programming for those students. Again, you would be still required to track progress and evaluate those services being provided. You might consider using funds designated for students to allow eligible private school teachers to complete, for example, online professional learning. So essentially you are taking some funds from student services and providing those for professional learning. Or you might be able to provide some additional family engagement resources. I've talked to a few districts who are planning to send home some learning packets with targets and activities that families can complete at home, with report card mailings, for example. You can certainly do something similar for private school families as well. You might consider offering summer services. So you might find that you need to delay services, which in the last bullet you'll see delay of services should be a last resort. But if, you know, listening to the governor's webcasts every day or every few days, considering what he's talking about for timelines, if that is possible, you could consider offering like a summer school for private school students as well. So if you do make the decision to delay services and carry funds over to the next school year, you will be required to allocate funds for services in addition to those funds that are carried over. So in the next application, the upcoming application, you are still on the hook for the total amount of funds reserved to provide those services. I think the most important point is, instead of just stopping services and not having conversation around that period, you need to be making attempts and having consultation with private school representatives on how to best serve their needs or meet their needs and what services to be provided, and talking about how to handle things during this period of shutdown. So Tara, we'll welcome any questions on those when we get to a question and answer session. But for now, I need districts to really think about how to meet those requirements, even during these extremely tough times.
Well, I'm trying. I've had a little bit of a lag on forwarding the slides, so I may have to stop sharing just for a minute. I don't know. I hate to do that. Well, I think it'll work. Okay, we did have a question. I think that was our next slide. We had a question that came in that said, when is the consolidated application due? And I'm sure that's a question that we've have quite a few districts would like to know.
Yeah, Tara, I don't think we've set a due date for that yet. We're trying to get the allocations processed first so we can get the application open. And then we'll make a decision on when that's going to be due. It's most likely going to be about a month or so from the opening of that application.
So the information provided today, we know it's going to be at some point pretty soon. We don't know exactly when, but want to kind of give you some guidance and some reminders and updates until that happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, let me adjust the slides here and we'll see if we can move on.
Thanks, David, for that information on equitable services. It's going to be very helpful as we move forward. I thought I would share with you today some helpful tips so that when the application process does open, it's always nice to know these little tips and resources that you can have at your disposal to get you through the process. Some of the things that I found very helpful when I was working in GMAP is you're in the middle of working on something and you get called away, and when you come back, your session has timed out and you have lost your current work. So this is the most helpful tip for me, was to reset your session timeout clock and avoid being locked out while you are working. So in order to do that, if you hover over the Save and Go To button and you click Current Page, it will save your current work, and that is so helpful. Also remember to please not use the back button to maneuver through GMAP. You must always use the Save and Go To button to go to the next page or the previous page. Another added addition for help is the Help for Current Page. You will find that in your main navigation window. This provides additional support for the page that you're currently working on. I use that constantly when I was in the different sections. The district set-aside section especially has drop-down explanations for each of those allowable set-asides, and that is extremely helpful in working on your narratives. Another thing that you could do to help you working in GMAP is to open it in 2 different browsers. That kind of allows you to toggle back and forth, and if you're having trouble with a current page, you're able to access help for that while you're seeing the two screens. The approval workflow is how do we get the application from the not started process to KDE consultant approved or return not approved. So this is a valuable chart that takes you through that process. And so when your application becomes open for you, it will have a not started in the workflow step. And this is the initial allocation. There will not be an email that you will have to complete this process. But the next step that you will have to take the application through is to start the draft. And so you will just click on the button and start it. Once it is started, the District Consolidated Update will open for you. And you will work on that application process until it is completed. Once it is completed, you will click that button and it will go to the District Consolidated Director. That is the person that will be the next step to do an approval at the district level. It will then send an email to the finance officer at the district level, where the finance officer will either approve it or not approve it. Once it is approved, it will go to the superintendent, and the superintendent will approve or not approve. These steps have to occur in order for the application to get back to your KDE consolidated consultant. And sometimes that's part of the process that as districts we get a little confused about when do we get that application back to KDE and our consultant. And at that point, the consultant will either approve it or not approve it, and it will come back to the district. So that's a very helpful chart while you're working on your application. Another important resource that is embedded in GMAP is on the sections page. You will find a column that's titled Validation. Now, validations are the business rules checks that are put into place to ensure that the quality of the data is being submitted. This system automatically runs the validation as the application is being completed. So sometimes you may see validation messages as in errors or warnings. Errors must be addressed because it will prevent you from submitting your application. Warnings are just to point out areas that may need some additional work, but you are able to submit the application with a warning. To get help with some of the application requirements, we have a lot of resources that are provided on KDE's document and resource page on our website. Also, remember to use GMAP's Help for Current page. A very important document is the KDE District Set-Aside Guidance. That will help you in doing the section titled District Set-Aside, and please refer to that often. Consulting with these resources can help you reduce your errors and omissions before your application is submitted. Details on forthcoming training on completing the Title I application in GMAP are coming soon. A very important checklist that you will find in your sections page. You can access it by going to the last item on your Save and Go To menu, or you can go to the sections page and find it at the very bottom. This checklist is extremely useful in that you are going to get information that is provided by your KDE consultant while they're reviewing your application for approval. It's a good way of seeing how they're providing feedback, and that opens up communication between the district and KDE. I use the checklist many, many times because it allows you to see where you are in the process of application approval. So after it's been reviewed, you are going to receive an email stating if it was approved or not approved. If it's not approved, you are going to consult that consolidated checklist to see areas that are marked attention needed. For those areas that are needing attention, please look at the checkboxes on the left side and the notes under each section. The consultant is going to provide you the necessary notes in order for you to make changes to make those corrections to get an approved application. So getting approval. These steps can help you get your application approved faster. Getting that application approved as quickly as possible will allow you to have access to your funding sooner. Funds cannot be spent until the entire consolidated application is approved. So that means all of the federal programs that your district is tied to, those individual sections must be approved before the whole entire consolidation application is approved. So funds are intended to be spent on students in the current school year. For example, your fiscal year 21 funds should be spent on the students in the school year of 2021. And at this time, I guess we will entertain some questions regarding the GMAP process.
We
Sarah,
actually
do you have any?
We do have a couple of questions. I believe the first one is from a comment that David had made when he was talking about the allocations. And the question is, do those allocations include all programs in the application, or will those be coming in separately?
So I believe they will be coming in together, including Title V, I hope. I know we had some delay with Title V last year just because of some changes that have been made over the last couple of years in that program by USAID, but I believe it's going to include everything.
Okay, and we have another question, which is there some guidance on using parent engagement funds? And I'm guessing that the question is referring to now in light of the COVID crisis. Do we have any guidance on that? We've been working on lots of guidance. And so I think that's a great question and something that we could look at putting some suggestions out there for. What do you all think, David and Brenda?
No, I would agree with that. I'm not sure what can't remember what we've included in any guidance that has gone to districts so far, but yes, we could, if there are specific questions, especially provide guidance on those questions.
I agree.
Okay, so that's something we'll look for, and thank you for, we'll look at providing that. It sure was, and thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, Tara, I have one more maybe helpful hint for GMAP, and
sure.
I had a district ask earlier this week if principals could any way be involved or see the GMAP application, and that is possible for them to see. If you wanted them to be part of the application review or to see what's going on with the application, whoever assigns roles within your district can assign the role of district data view to principals, which would give them access to see the application but not make changes or do any of the approval steps. So I just thought I might throw that out there, that somebody was kind of thinking a little bit outside the box, and I don't think we've seen many principals have that access before. So I just wanted to throw that out as a potential aid in helping with the application development.
Thanks, David. And we have another follow-up, another question about parent-family engagement that's come through. So we got two more questions that have come through here in the last minute or so. The first question is, during the spring semester, most schools conduct the annual parent and family engagement meeting. We've asked all to send the survey out in electronic format during this time. But do we have any guidance on how to conduct this meeting in which it's required to invite all parents to attend to review the compact and policy?
So I'll make just a couple recommendations on that. Right now, of course, you can't have large group gatherings as ordered by the governor. Those, if you watched his updates yesterday, they're slowly going to be rolling out some, they're going to lessen the hold on those restrictions, I guess, and keep watching those updates to see any information about large group gatherings. Secondly is this might be something that has to be delayed until next school year if you're going to have trouble getting feedback. So it's something you might be able to do very early on in the school year when you can have larger meetings, or when school is able to be back in session. That's something to consider, particularly where internet access might be an issue across the community. But if you think you can get good feedback through surveys, or if you can hold online meetings, that might be the way to go for now. But it's something that also you're going to have to be flexible with and might have to conquer at the beginning of the next school year.
And I'll just add too that that's a question that we can continue to look at, and perhaps if we put out some FAQs around parent and family engagement, like a previous district had asked about how to use those funds, that we could consider this question at the same time and put out some FAQs on that. And thank you very much for these suggestions. They're very nice. It's really helpful to us to know what kinds of questions districts are having. There's one more question that came in. David, this refers to your equitable services information. It says, David mentioned an editable PDF for a consultation packet. Where do I obtain this document?
You can find that on the KDE webpage. If you'll search for ESSA Ombudsman, there will be a page that I manage, and that document is on that page. It was also sent out a couple months ago in a Monday email, and I believe that was sent to program coordinators as a direct email. That would have come either from me or Jennifer Aiken. I think it came from me, but you can, there are 3 resources where you should be able to find that document.
All right, thank you, David. We don't have any more questions right at this time, so we'll go ahead and continue on to our next section. Get those slides going. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the just a kind of a recap of something we talked about. I had a pie chart a couple of webinars ago showing some of the findings in consolidated monitoring. So we're getting ready to start our section this morning on time and effort. And if you recall back then, if you recall that pie chart, it showed the percentages of findings in several different categories, and those categories actually come from the monitoring form that we use. And if you recall, we had 22% of findings in fiscal management. So let's take a little bit more deeper dive into those into that fiscal management category to see exactly where those findings were. We had 28% due to misalignment between GMAP and MUNIS, so that was the highest percentage. We had 24% in time and effort. So that's one reason why I wanted to talk about time and effort, because this is a finding that we see an awful lot. 16% were due to the lack of allowability procedures. 12% were due to lack of Title I complaint procedures, and 8% were due to lack of inventory and disposal of equipment procedures. All of these categories and the requirements, the things we're looking for, are in that monitoring form, which is on our documents and resources page. And I think we've talked about almost all of these topics on prior webinars, but we may circle back around and revisit some of them, especially if you have some specific questions. If that's the case, please send them to me in an email or put your questions or suggestions in the feedback survey link that we are going to continue to keep open. Today, like I said, we're going to focus on time and effort reporting, which seems like a straightforward topic, but as I mentioned, it's one of the most common findings, even across states. When we go to certain national conferences, we hear the same thing, and sometimes they have entire sessions devoted just to time and effort. So let's look at what the Code of Federal Regulations talks about. You may remember from a previous webinar that for your allowability procedure, you need to decide how you're going to decide whether a cost is allowable or not. The allowability procedure should discuss how the school or district will use the principles of RAND, or reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented. Let's look at the A, or allocable, for just a minute. Remember that in this case, we're talking about the salary of a person you want to pay with federal funds, whether that's full federal or partly. This slide is saying that the work that the person does has to be allocable or chargeable to the federal grant. In order for the person's salary to be allocable to the federal grant, the work they're doing has to be incurred specifically for the federal award. It benefits both the federal award and other work, and it can be distributed in proportions that may be approximated using reasonable methods, and it's necessary to the overall operation of the non-federal entity. So let's look at the idea of proportions a little bit more on the next slide. First of all, time and effort has to be collected for all employees whose salaries are paid in whole or in part with federal funds. And so in this case, we're specifically talking about Title I. It's required for employees, not contractors. The way you document time and effort is different from those who are paid 100% with federal funds and those who are partly paid with Title I funds. And we'll revisit that topic a little later with some more specifics. The Code of Federal Regulations that we looked at on the previous slide also says that if a cost benefits two or more projects or activities in proportions that can be determined without undue effort or cost, the cost should be allocated to the projects based on proportional benefit. So we're looking at the percentage of Title I funds that would be used and the percentage of other funds that would be used to pay their salary. The standards for documentation. These costs have to be determined. There has to be documentation of the work that's being done, and so it says if the costs can be allocated or transferred to the benefit projects on any reasonable documented basis. So when we're talking about documentation, these are the standards of documentation for time and effort. And basically, this slide talks about the documentation and the criteria for the documentation. First, there needs to be a system of internal control that can provide reasonable assurance that the charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. The documentation has to be part of the official records of the non-federal entity. It has to reasonably reflect the total activity for which the employee is compensated, not to exceed 100%, and it needs to comply with your established accounting policies and practices. And as we see on this slide, the documentation also has to support distribution among specific activities or cost objectives. A cost objective is defined as a program, function, activity, award, organizational subdivision, contract, or work unit. So when we're talking about time and effort, we need to know how many cost objectives the person is working on. So I know that was a very quick journey through the CFR, and you all can go back and look at that, and there's hot links there that you can access the Code of Federal Regulations on your own. But I want to talk now about what this actually means for you and your day-to-day work. If you're paying personnel 100% from Title I funds, which would be a single cost objective, you'll need to make sure each of these employees completes a semi-annual certification form twice a year. It's completed after the fact, which means it's filled out and signed after the work has been done. So if the first period is from January 1st to June 30th, right after June 30th, the forms would need to be completed. And these are very basic. It's just a single page. It's got very basic information on it. And a second certification would need to be done right after the period of July 1st through December 31st. The form needs to be signed by the employee and the supervisor with firsthand knowledge of the work performed. If you have personnel you're paying partly with Title I, or in other words, they're working on multiple cost objectives, they'll need to fill out a monthly Personnel Activity Report, or PAR. The PAR shows the number of hours the employee worked directly with Title I and other duties. Like the Semiannual Certification, it reflects an after-the-fact distribution of the employee's actual activity. That means it shows the actual time they worked on the different cost objectives, not what they planned to work. The PAR must account for the percentage of time for which the employee is paid from each program, and it accounts for their total activity. The PAR also needs to be signed by the employer and the employee and the supervisor with firsthand knowledge of the work performed. PARs are prepared at least monthly and coincide with one or more pay periods. Because maintaining a monthly PAR can be time-consuming, it may be possible to use a substitute system. So this applies to the monthly PAR reports. The substitute system could be used for those employees who work on multiple cost objectives and who have a set schedule. This slide shows a few criteria, but there's a lot more information on the substitute system in the Title I handbook. There's actually a lot of good information on time and effort reporting in that handbook that's posted on our documents and resources page. So be sure to check on that as well. And a question has come through. I'm going to, so here's a good question. Let me finish this up and then we'll get to this question. Okay. One last thing I'd like to share with you about time and effort is this information, which I thought was interesting. And this is from the Code of Federal Regulations, and it says that budget estimates, which in other words, estimates determined before the services are performed, alone would not qualify as support for charges to federal awards, but could be used for interim accounting purposes. So in your GMAP application, it's not sufficient that the employee would be that would be an estimate, and it wouldn't be sufficient as part of your only documentation. As I've said before, the actual time a person spent in working on Title I has to be after the fact reporting. It can't be used. It can't be a projected estimate. So this is saying that those types of estimates could be used for interim accounting purposes as long as the conditions on the slide are met, including that the necessary adjustments would still have to be made such that the final amount charged to the federal award is accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. So hopefully that's helped with any questions you may have had about time and effort reporting, but if not, please feel free to call or email. And we have a couple of questions over this, or at least one, and it says, if you are over all federal programs, does your time and effort documentation need to be divided? Example, Title II, Title IV, Title I, etc. So we look at Title I, and we're going to be looking at all the PARs and the semi-annuals for people who worked either fully with Title I or partly with Title I. And if Title II and some other programs are probably going to have the same requirements. David, do you want to jump in on that? Because you look at those a lot more than I do.
Yeah, in general, the answer to that question is yes, your time would have to be divided. There is some flexibility that USAID offered with time and effort reporting, and we have advertised that a few times. There may be some information about that in the handbook, Tara. I don't remember right offhand. But for those flexibilities to be applied, there would have to be approval from KDE in order to do that. But generally, yes, in that case, you're going to be performing different types of work in each of those programs. So your cost objective for each of those programs is going to be different. So that would require a monthly certification.
And what we may do is to follow up on this question and provide you with a thorough answer. And Brenda's going to be taking over the newsletters, and so that would be a good question, I think, to add in the newsletter. We'll get you some more information on that could specifically address that question. We did have one other question that came through, and this is a good one too. It says, are digital signatures allowable during the COVID closures on PARs and also the semi-annual certifications by both the employee and supervisor?
Tara, I would say yeah, because face-to-face contact is limited. There would have to be some sort of signature on those, so the requirement still exists.
I would agree with that as well, and you might even be able to make a note on there that the electronic signature had to be done due to the COVID, the COVID crisis.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say something similar, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, that would be good documentation to have. So thank you for those good questions. And again, we'll follow up a little bit more on that time and effort, that first time and effort question. Be looking for that in the newsletter. So we got one more thing. This is basically just a reminder. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on this, but it's almost the end of the school year. Inventory was one of those things that seemed to be one of those end of the year tasks. So I just wanted to put this reminder out there. Maybe this is not something, inventory is not something you can do right now, but perhaps over the summer, and especially if you're purchasing equipment or other types of supplies with your Title I funds, as those come in, you need to be aware of inventory requirements. We have a very good document on the Title I webpage that is linked on the last slide of this presentation that can help with inventory management. And let us know if you have additional questions. There's the document that's listed in the second bullet point on the slide just came out late yesterday afternoon. It outlines flexibility, temporary flexibility for repurposing existing equipment and supplies to meet the immediate needs due to the COVID-19 national pandemic. So I'm just passing that along to you. It came out late yesterday afternoon. And we have some resources to share with you. And there, in that second bullet point, there is the document I mentioned on inventory management. And last, our May webinar is on Thursday, May the 28th, 10 a.m. Eastern. I'd like to invite all of you back for that and hope you'll be able to join. We had one additional person last month who submitted some feedback through the survey, and I'm really glad to have that feedback and your questions as always. So please keep that in mind if you want to share any feedback through the survey. That link will still be open. Thank you for joining us this morning and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all.